What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. It's Monday, so time to go over the top waiver wire ads for week 12. Bit of a different week this week. Everything on the website is going to be exactly the same, but because of Thanksgiving, the videos will not be. This video and the Saturday video are going to be normal, but on Wednesday, I'm going to post a start-sit video that goes over every position. I'm just going to do, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, everything all in one video. I'm going to record it like a mock draft Monday to where you guys see the screen and I'm in the bottom right. I think I'm just going to show like the full projections for the team I'm going over just on the screen. If you'd prefer to only see the final rankings, I guess I can do that, but I'm going to show you the full projections and the final rankings. So I think you guys are going to like kind of the setup. It'll only be for 1 week. In week 13 through the rest of the season, we'll go back to the normal setup, but because of Thanksgiving, we got to do things differently this week. So today, waiver wire, not fantastic. This is not one of the good weeks for waiver wire, though it's good because nobody's on bye. Like there are 0 teams on bye this week. So while there are still injuries, you have, less things that you need to replace. The top options are probably rostered in most competitive leagues, but I at least want to mention them in case they are not in yours. I view the clear top 4 this week as Treylon Watson, Isaiah Pacheco, Rachaad White, and George Pickens, and I do believe in that order. Watson, 5 touchdowns the last 2 weeks, pretty easily right now separating as the top wide receiver for Aaron Rodgers. That's fantastic. Pacheco, last 2 weeks has been the clear lead back for the Chiefs, and then Clyde hasn't been confirmed yet. Seems like a high ankle sprain, but at the very least is an ankle sprain, and he was already being phased out. Now, they were actually working him in more this last week than they did 2 weeks ago, but doesn't matter. Pacheco's looked really good. He's not going to get any targets, but just had 100 yards. Was the first Chiefs running back to do that in a while. He's good. He's on the Chiefs. Starting running back, you have to own him. Rachaad White has been, I don't want to say significantly outplaying Fournette. Neither one of them has been amazing, but White seems to have a little bit more juice, looks a little bit quicker out there. Both good in the receiving game, so that's not really one where they have to lean on Fournette. White's still great in the receiving game. If Fournette is forced to miss any time, Rachaad White will be probably a low-end running back 1 in those weeks. Like I said last week, doesn't seem like Fournette's going to miss any time, but at least there's the off chance that happens. And then Pickens. I don't want to say clearly separating over Deontay Johnson as the clear number 1, but this is a, elite rookie wide receiver in the second half of the rookie season. That's just when players break out. He could have honestly had well over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns this week, but he dropped one. I don't know how long it was, maybe a 40-yard touchdown that he probably should have caught. And then there was another one where he was wide open deep and Kenny Pickett just missed him, just overthrew him. He still had a good game, 4 for 83 and a touchdown, and he looks incredible, looks awesome, going to be a really good player in the league. Obviously, limited by the offense. The offense can only be so good this season with the rookie quarterback who wasn't really a high-end prospect, but it doesn't matter. All those 4, sure. There are some issues with all of them, but they need to be rostered in 90, 95% of leagues. I think all 4 are worth the number 1 claim in my eyes. I would say the first 2, I would spend around 20 to 25% in just a normal, half PPR 12-team league. Adjust from there. If you're in an 8-team league, you don't need to spend 25%. You're in a 16-team league, you probably need to spend 100% if they're somehow on your free agency. But first 2 around 25%, next 2 closer to 10 to 15% of your fab. After those 4, I think Treylon Burks is kind of in a tier of his own. He was great on Thursday night. He is clearly separating as the Titans' top wide receiver. I think he'll definitely be the most valuable for them the rest of the season. Obviously, he's going to be inconsistent because it's the Titans. Only 2 teams have thrown the ball less than they have this season, and that's not going to change. We know that's their philosophy. They're going to try and play really solid defense, limit teams offensively, run the ball a lot, not commit turnovers, and that's not anything you want to hear if you have the wide receiver on that team. But if it's the number one wide receiver, if he's going to approach, look at 25%, 30% target share in some games, and he's going to be, talented, like he's still a first round rookie, he's a talented player, needs to be rostered. So I would say that's the top 5. Unless someone is, rostered in 85% of leagues, but you're in the 15% where they're not, well, then go after them. But in general, that's probably what you're looking at as Elite 5. Then after that, it's not fantastic. Like I said, it's not a good week for waiver wire. I would say the next person you're considering, it's not even for all of you, is DeShaun Watson if you want him. But I went over last week how I have Tua and I have Geno in my leagues, and both were on bye this week. Obviously, I'm in separate leagues. So I just survived the bye for those leagues this week. And then moving forward, I'm not going to be picking up DeShaun Watson. I'm just going to be rolling with those two. I would say that if you have worse options than that, maybe you've been streaming through these, low end quarterback 2s you haven't figured out yet, you're someone who might go after Watson. But anyone who has the, Joe Burrow, you've got Mahomes, Herbert, Tua, quarterbacks like that, it's not something you really need to go after. I would say it's more if you've been really struggling, then I'd go after him. After that, I think it's these secondary running back options. Not super pumped about any of them, but if you happen to be in a tough spot, which again is not as likely this week, but if you happen to still be in a tough spot, you need someone to just stream running back to. I would say the top options are looking like Samaje Perine, Kyren Williams, Cam Akers, and Gus Edwards. Mixon did suffer a concussion this week. Typically, you're going to miss a week when you suffer a concussion. Everyone recovers differently. Some people recover much quicker, some people slower. On average, we're looking at you miss the next week, you come back after that. We saw Perine score the 3 receiving touchdowns on, pretty similar situations. They get into the red zone, they get him on a linebacker, they throw him the ball in a wheel route or something like that. It was just their go-to play basically, but it was working. So why would they not continue going to it? Again, I think Mixon will miss, and so you get Perine next week, but it's against the Titans, and that's I don't want to say the worst spot imaginable, but it's a bottom 3 spot. You do not want to play the Titans as a running back, especially when you're Samaje Perine. He's fine, and he's a really good backup. He was honestly a good handcuff to have because he's good in the receiving game. They trust him. He's not going to go out there and get a billion touches, but when he takes over from Mixon, they're okay, we'll just kind of treat him as a starting running back. Sure, Chris Evans might mix in a little bit, but let's be honest, it's Perine, but it's against the Titans. And so he still might just grade out as a low end 2. So please don't break the bank. Don't be oh my goodness, he scored 3 touchdowns, I have to go and acquire Perine. I'm spending 50% of my fab, because you're probably getting a 1 week rental as a low end 2. And that's not worth a whole lot. So if you want to spend a few percent, that's fine. But again, that's where we're already at in the video, is a few percent. After that, I'd say it's Kyren Williams and Akers. I don't understand, something will probably get released, but so Henderson started the game. He had 4 snaps total, but he started off. He didn't look terrible. I don't know. It's only 4 plays, so it's you can't really say how much he looked. But I didn't hear anything about getting hurt. I just kind of figured once they started going with just Kyren and Akers the rest of the game, that Henderson got hurt. And maybe he did, but I just haven't seen anything that indicates that he did yet. But if you guys see something like that, kind of says why. But yeah, he only played 4 snaps. It was really just Akers and Kyren, and that's obviously what we need in fantasy. We cannot start any of them in a 3 running back committee. As we work into 2, they become more viable, and if they work into 2, maybe one of them can start getting a more significant role that we can trust in fantasy, and then use them. Unfortunately, right now, it's still not that case. Akers had 14 carries and 0 targets. And when you look at that on the Rams, you're okay, well, number 1, he hasn't been that fantastic. Number 2, their line stinks. So 14 carries might, on average, be 4 fantasy points. So that's not great. And then if he's getting all those carries, it means Kyren, okay, he's got potential for receptions, but, it's a few receptions and a few carries, and it's not super valuable. So again, only a few percent if you want them. The correct answer for this backfield rest of season is probably just that all of them will be bad, that you'll never be able to start any of them. But if one of them has a chance, it's Kyren. Akers is never going to be featured to where he's getting receptions, and so he's basically at his ceiling right now. Kyren is my favorite because even if right now he's not like overly valuable, if to close out the season, final few weeks, they want to kind of go with one running back, want to see what they have. Well, he's going to be the passing down back for the rest of the season regardless. If he gets more carries, now he might have some value. But again, even in a 2 running back split, you're probably not even able to start any of these guys. And then Gus had a chance to return this week, would have been good, but he didn't. So his value goes down a little bit because now we're like 1 week closer to Dobbins returning. And when Dobbins returns, it's like you've got Dobbins, you've got Gus, you've got Justice Hill. They're probably going to start 3. Like you have Drake 2, but I would imagine Drake would go inactive and they would keep Hill. And it's like you still got Lamar stealing carries. And so, the ceiling isn't that high. But if you want to add Gus, think that Dobbins takes a few more weeks to return. And then maybe Gus next 2 to 3 weeks can get like 14 to 16 carries and hopefully a target. That's way more valuable than Akers getting, that workload. But once Dobbins returns, it's not going to be fantastic for Gus. So as you can see, not fantastic options outside the top 5 or so players. But again, you probably don't need waivers as much with no buys this week. After those running backs, I think you look back to wide receiver with Donovan Peoples-Jones, Odell, and Paris Campbell. Though it completely depends. Like if you couldn't care less about those running backs, go right to these wide receivers. Like this next portion of the video is very like dependent on what you need. Like we're going to talk about tight end after this. Well, if you desperately need a tight end, bump that up ahead of the running backs we just talked about and the wide receivers. I would say the top 5 is pretty locked in. After that, just kind of mix and match what you need on your team. But for these wide receivers, I think they're definitely a step below the ones we talked about before. Again, Peoples-Jones, Odell, Paris Campbell. Peoples-Jones, 4 receptions, at least 4 or more in 7 straight, 60 or more receiving yards in 5 straight. He's an every down wide receiver. The ceiling, I've talked about how like the ceiling theoretically has not been there yet this season. Like he's been very consistent in getting you like around that 9 to 11 fantasy point range, which is good because you can use it when you're desperate. You can use that and be like, I have buys, I have injuries, I can plug him in. He's getting me 10, right? And I'm comfortable with that. It's unfortunate that like the ceiling hasn't been there, but I think it is. Like I think he has a ceiling. He just hasn't shown it yet because like he's had a lot of receptions where he gets either tackled or pushed out of bounds very close to the end zone. He finally scored this week, but like he's always on the field. They are using him in the red zone. He is being used downfield. It's like I feel like he's gonna have one game this season where he just drops a nuke of like 7 for 130 and 2 touchdowns because it's like you watch the game and you're like, he's capable of this. It just hasn't happened yet. And maybe it does happen when Watson does return, starting in week 13 on. And so a really good player if he's still in free agency. We talked about him a little bit last week as like kind of a flyer because it's still like he hasn't truly broken out yet. And it's like he still kind of has been more of a piece where it's like you're probably just keeping on the bench, but he has upside to close the season. So I would look to him. And then after that, Odell. This one is more, what do you need? Like if you need someone to get you into the playoffs, that's not Odell. I don't know that he's even going to start until you make it that far. He's probably going to join a team after Thanksgiving. We don't know what team it's going to be, but he wants to join a Super Bowl contender. And so if he's going to join a Super Bowl contender, let's be honest, they're going to have a good offense. And he said he wants to be on the field pretty quickly after joining that new team. So basically add him if you're maybe 60-70% chance of like making the playoffs, and then maybe he can be someone who helps you advance throughout the playoffs. But if you have to make the playoffs, don't go after Odell. I don't think you'll be able to use him until then. And then finally, Paris Campbell. It's basically contingent on Matt Ryan, who I'm pretty sure is going to be the quarterback for the rest of the season, but he's been good with Matt Ryan, terrible with everyone else. 11, 12, 9, and 6 targets in the last 4 games with Matt Ryan. Now, he is a player where a lot of those targets are low ADOT, which means low upside. So like a lot of them, they're basically going to go for like 7 or 8 yards and don't have a big chance to go any further. But we saw this week he had a target downfield. Like we have seen in recent weeks, he'll be used on like screen passes, which technically have a low ADOT, but like have a lot of upside after the fact. And he will get some targets downfield. So he's a totally fine option. Probably not someone that in like a 12-team league that is playoff bound, you are starting in the flex. Like he's still a little bit below that. But especially in deeper formats and maybe full PPR formats, and maybe just as a rotational piece, we're going to have a big week 14 bye. Maybe you're looking ahead to that, being like, I need someone for there. Hopefully he's not on bye in week 14. I didn't even check that. The odds are, I guess he's not, but if he is, that's unfortunate. But just as a rotational piece, I don't think he's someone that's like every week being started for you. After those wide receivers, then I think you look at the tight ends. He did awful this week, but Foster Moreau is definitely the top option in my eyes. We got the Seahawks and the Cardinals every week are a smash spot for tight ends. And so obviously at Denver is a very difficult spot for everyone not named like Devonta Adams apparently. But like, not surprising that Foster Moreau didn't play great at Denver, but then he goes to at Seattle. That's going to make life a lot easier for Moreau. We're not dropping like 10% of our fab on this guy or anything. We're not using like number 1, 2, 3 claim on him. But if he's available in free agency, pretty unlikely. I would say that a lot of people go after him after, like one catch, I believe he had. And so maybe you can even add him after free agency ends, but I'd be fine, if you've got like 40% of your fab left. If you want to spend like a few percent on that, secure Foster Moreau. I think he's going to have a good week this week. I go after him. And then behind him, it's really just like Evan Ingram, Taysom Hill, and Juwan Johnson. All three are worth 1 to 2% of your fab. Most likely you can just wait, see who clears waivers, and just add them. They're all going to grade out as tight end 2s this week. But if you're desperate, you haven't figured tight end out yet, maybe you've had some injuries, they're not awful options. Just know that like you do have to figure it out at some point. Like I don't feel comfortable if you have, Evan Ingram as your top 10. You pick him up and you're like, all right, has this solved tight end? I don't think so. I mean, if you're like championship bound, you're trying to make the championship. If you're streaming Ingram, Hill, Juwan Johnson, like sure they're fine, but like they have a floor of 1 point. And so like when you go up against Kelsey and he scores 35, like, well, you better be 34 points better than your opponent at all these other positions, which is still very difficult to do. So hopefully you can kind of figure that position out. You don't want to be streaming these guys, but those would be the top options if you really had to. After then, I think it's defenses. There are some actually decent options this week. The Jets were one of the best options last week. Hopefully you went after them. They're the top option again this week. They are probably not rostered, but I think I checked and it was like 30% of leagues are still available in. They're a great defense. You're just going to want to pick them up at the top option if they're available. They're probably not, though, if you're in a competitive league. So I would say Kansas City would be my top option. Dream spot, they get home against the Rams this next week. So even if you're like just looking for a 1 week streamer, I mean, let's be honest. They could get like 4 to 6 sacks in that game. And there's even more potential. Oh my goodness. Like if Stafford's forced to miss, like he suffered the concussion. That's his second concussion in 3 weeks. They're not going to make the playoffs, so they're not going to rush him back. Like, I mean, you have to think if he's not the quarterback, if Kupp is out, if their offensive line is still awful, that is going to be a disgusting game. So much potential for the Kansas City defense this week. Again, I think I prefer the Jets because they're basically matchup proof at this point. I mean, they're going to be phenomenal rest of the season. So many sacks, turnover potential. Like they're a great defense. But then the Chiefs right after that. If those two are taken, or if you miss out, you're watching this and you're like, oh no, I put in a bid, but it didn't get cleared. Vikings, Dolphins, and Titans. The Vikings get the Patriots, Jets, and Lions over the next 3 weeks. Patriots and Jets just, scored 3 points each before a punt return touchdown at the end of regulation. Like, a very fitting way to end that game. They scored 1 touchdown and had to come off of a punt. Like, no offense for either one of these teams. Now, the Patriots will be the better offense because, it was like a tough spot for them against the Jets, but like we have at least some hope for them. I really just don't have hope for Zach Wilson. If they don't have Breece Hall, the Jets are just not good. Like they're just not a good offense. And so both of these teams like are significantly worse than the Cowboys. And so I know that the Vikings just got absolutely annihilated by Dallas this week, but Dallas is up here and like the Patriots and the Jets are like way down here. It's a much different experience. Vikings are still like a perfectly fine defense. They'll get sacks and turnovers. And so that's a good spot for them the next 2 weeks. Can't get them. Dolphins, they get the Texans, 49ers, and Chargers. And so you're probably only going to want to play them for 1 week. I wouldn't imagine you want to play the Dolphins against the 49ers and Chargers, but it's worth streaming defenses even for 1 week. I mean, getting the Texans is still a really good matchup, so they'll be good. And then the Titans. The Titans get the Bengals. That one is a little bit contingent on Chase. So like if we think Mixon is out, that's obviously going to help the Titans defense. But if Chase returns, well, now the Bengals are probably just going to throw the ball like 70% of plays, and I would not be in love with the Titans. But one thing you always want to consider with defense streaming is that like points matter. Like obviously the Jets and the Patriots this week were great defense streaming options because like you knew both teams were just not going to be able to score. And so they don't even need that many sacks and turnovers. But basically once a team scores into like the teens, like into like 13 points and on, you actually don't get that many points for like the points against. It's basically only if you score like less than 10 total points in the game that it matters. And so even if the Bengals score 27, let's say, against the Titans, which teams have not been scoring against the Titans, so that's not even a lock if Chase returned. But even if Chase returns and they score a lot, if they're throwing the ball 70% of plays, like the Titans are probably racking up like 5 sacks in that game. They're probably getting a turnover or 2. So even if you don't get many points overall for like the points against, they might be able to get 7-8 fantasy points, even giving up a lot of points. And there's still the chance that Titans, as an underrated defense against a terrible offensive line, just force a bunch of mistakes, force a turnover that scores into a touchdown, force a bunch of sacks, and still score a lot of fantasy points. So way more potential if Chase and Mixon are out, but even if Chase returns, I do think the Titans are still a good defense play. After defenses, everyone else is basically just a flyer. If you want to spend anywhere from like 1 to 3% of your fab on the remaining players, sure. I'm going to tell you my order for how I would go after them, but there's such like a little amount separating all of these players that go for the ones that you feel better about, that you think have a ceiling, like something. Like all of these players just shouldn't really be started in a normal league anywhere from like 8, 10, or 12 teams, but maybe there's a path to them producing a little bit more to close the season. If you see something where you're like, oh, I like this player, I think there's a chance, go after them. But my top options for running back would be James Cook, Tyler Algier, Jerick McKinnon, Latavius Murray, Alexander Madison, and Spiller. For wide receivers, Nico, Darius Slayton, Matt Collins, Terrace Marshall, and Demarcus Robinson. And then my favorite quarterback streaming options this week would be Heineke versus the Falcons, then Mariota on the other side at the Commanders. And then Kenny Pickett would be like not in love with him this week because he's at Indy and he's also not very good, but he's got some mobility. And maybe in like the final few weeks of the season, if you abandon quarterback and still haven't figured it out, but you've got this like dream everything else and you just need someone out there, maybe he's got an okay close to the season because he still has good skill players and he still has some mobility, so he could go out there, maybe score 20 fantasy points sometimes in a good matchup. So that is how the waiver wire is looking in week 12. Again, not amazing, but no buys this week, so it's not the end of the world that it doesn't look that great. You shouldn't need waivers too badly. I will have the rest of season rankings and the week 12 rankings up on Tuesday, and then Wednesday I'll do starts and sits for, again, like every position, running back, wide receiver, quarterback, tight end, and I'm going to have it like mock draft Monday style, where you guys are going to see the exact projections for all of the players on that team and then their ranking for that week. And then I'll just kind of like cycle through all the teams, just how it has to happen this week. So that'll do it for this one. Hope you all enjoy. If you did, how about hitting the like button? How about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? Thanks for watching.